Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Sukkah, pages Yud Aleph through Yud Zayin, 11 through 17. Yud Aleph. Tanya, ki basukot hoshavti et bnei Yisrael. The Braita quotes the Torah. It says that the reason why we dwell in a sukkah on the holiday of Sukkot is because in the days of the wilderness in the Midbar, God caused our ancestors, bnei Yisrael, to dwell in Sukkot. The question is, what were those Sukkot? In the viewpoint of Rabbi Eliezer, the Sukkot referred to in the Tanakh are actually the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, the miraculous clouds that God provided for our ancestors to protect them from the elements. Rabbi Akiva Omer Sukkot Mamash Asu Lahem, whereas Rabbi Akiva offers a more mundane explanation that the Sukkot referred to in the Torah of the mitzvah referred to actual booths that our ancestors dwelled in as they traveled across the desert. Rashi explains, Sukkot mamash mipnei hachama b'shat chaniyatan yosim Sukkot, that because it was hot and very sunny in the Midbar, Bnei Yisrael naturally did what was appropriate, and they built huts for themselves to provide sail, to provide shade. And it is those Sukkot, those mundane Sukkot, that we remember when we observe the mitzvah these many years later. Yud Bet, page 12. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amru. So Rabbi Yochanan says, why did the sages issue the following ruling? You cannot make a sukkah, you cannot make schach for a sukkah out of bundles of straw or bundles of wood. So technically speaking, those items, straw and wood, are valid materials to use for schach. They grow from the ground, they're gidulei karka, and in mekablim tuma, they are not susceptible to impurity. So why should it be that bundles are no good if individually these kash and eitzim are fine? So the Gemara explains. It'll happen every now and then that a person will come home from work in the evening, and his bundle, his package will be on his back, on his shoulder, and he'll throw his bundle off his shoulder onto the roof of a hut that is near his house, in order for the straw or the wood to dry out in the heat of the sun atop the roof of that hut. And then what's going to happen? Sometime later, many days, weeks, months later, the person will recognize that I now have an obligation to make a sukkah for the holiday of Sukkot, and I have this hut, and there's kasher, there's eitzim on top of it. Lo and behold, this looks like a good kosher sukkah. But that's not. The Torah requires that we make a sukkah for the sake of the holiday of Sukkot, to observe the mitzvah. It cannot be that the sukkah came about of its own accord. And in this instance, there was a hut, and there was a package thrown on top of it with no intention of the holiday, and you say, presto, that's a sukkah. That doesn't work. So in order to avoid a scenario like that, the sages decreed you cannot use chavilot, bundles of eitzim or kash, in order to satisfy the schach obligation. Okay, Yud Gimel. Those vegetables that the sages said are suitable, are kosher, to fulfill the mitzvah of maror, the bitter herbs, on the night of the Seder, on Passover, they will be regarded as nothingness when it comes to the schach, that they will invalidate a sukkah just like empty space would. In other words, if you have 3 tfachim, 3 handbreadths of empty space on the roof of a sukkah, that invalidates the kashrut, the suitability of the sukkah, because there's no schach in that spot. And these vegetables will be treated the same way. My time. Well, why? After all, there's something there. It's not that there's nothing there. Well, because when these vegetables dry out, they wither and they crumble, and there really is nothing left. So even now, when they haven't yet withered, we'll regard them as being nothingness. And Rashi explains, Kishur Shavir Posel Badahanur Pishloshat Fachim, 3 handbreadths. Yud Daled, page 14. If you try to make a sukkah with schach made out of boards, wooden boards, cedar boards, and these boards do not have a width of 4 tfachim, it's kosher. Yesh ben arba, but if they are 4 tfachim wide, Rabbi Meir posel, Rabbi Meir says they're invalid. Rabbi Yehuda machshir, but Rabbi Yehuda says they're still valid. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda tries to prove that he's right. Masechet Sukkah Dapim. There was an incident involving a time of danger. We took boards that were 4 tfachim across, and we made a sukkah with these boards on our porch, and we sat underneath it. So the others said to Rabbi Yehuda, you want to bring a proof from there? Ein shada sakana raya. You cannot bring a proof for a halachic point from something that was done at a time of an emergency, of a danger. Because in times of emergency, we relax the standards to permit things that otherwise would not be kosher. Tetvav, 15. The Mishnah tells us, if you make schach for your sukkah out of iron poles, shpudim, or barukot hamita, the leg of a bed, so these things are not valid for purposes of schach. If there's enough space in between these poles, corresponding to the length of the width of these poles, then the sukkah is kosher. It would sound like 50-50 is kosher. 50% valid schach and 50% shpudim, which are invalid. So the Gemara says, Parutz ka'omed, what is the status of a 50-50 split between 50% kosher partitions and 50% empty? Rav Papa amar muter, Rav Huna amar aser. Rav Papa says it's allowed, Rav Huna said it's forbidden. The halacha is forbidden. Tet Zayin, 16. Rav Dimi amar, Rav Dimi said, Pam achat, on one occasion, shachachu v'lo heviu sefer Torah erev Shabbos, that they forgot to bring a Torah to the synagogue or to wherever they wanted to have public services on Friday. And since they're just forbidden to carry in the public domain on Shabbat, it would be impossible to bring the Sefer Torah to the place of the prayer services on Shabbat. So what do? Lamachar, the next day on Shabbat, pirsutz dinim al gabei amudim, they hung blankets across pillars in order to create a walkway, a passageway, which would now be a private domain, so that the Torah did not have to be brought in a public domain to get from point A to point B. They brought the Torah and they read from it. So Gemara says incredulously, you really think that they spread out these blankets to create partitions on Shabbat? From where did they get them? If you couldn't carry in the public domain, you couldn't carry a Torah, you couldn't carry a blanket either. Rather, they found that these sheets, these blankets, were already hung up on these amudim, these pillars, and the path already existed. So since the path already existed, they didn't have to create a structure. They just took the Torah from point A to point B and it led to synagogue services there. Yud Zayin, 17. So the Gemara wants to know how much invalid schach invalidates the whole sukkah. Avir pasel b'shlosha. If you have literally nothing, you're just looking straight up at the sky because there's nothing there on the roof, that will invalidate the sukkah at a width of 3 tfachim. However, schach pasul, if there is stuff up there, meaning it's not a straight shot to the sky, you have stuff that's just not kosher for schach purposes, posel ba'arba'ah. That will invalidate the sukkah only if it occupies a width of 4 tefachim. Everyone have a great week.